Hi everyone, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. She's the author of one of the first books on marketing that I picked up. Jessie Paul is a veteran marketing leader. She headed marketing at Wipro and iGate and was part of the early marketing team at Infosys before that. She's now the founder of Paul Writer, a marketing advisory firm and platform which she set up in 2010. We have lots to talk about today, and I'm super excited to get started. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Jessie.
Thanks, Roshan, for the opportunity. Always a pleasure to connect with fellow marketers.
Yeah, so maybe to begin with, we could understand your journey briefly from marketing at Infosys, iGate, and Wipro to then founding Paul Writer. What has that been like?
Okay, so the journey actually started before that. My first job was as a computer engineer, and I did not like that, and that's why I did an MBA. And I really wanted to be in advertising, actually. So my first job out of campus was Ogilvy and Mather Advertising. And I do have to say that, a lot of the principles that I still follow came from the ad years, because you worked on such a large variety of clients and you dealt with so many different people. I don't think there's any job today where you'll have to deal with like the gundas who'll come for you, like the billboard guys. And, you stand around at midnight trying to build your standee because nobody's there at the time. So, and you go to the printing press and you rush to the Hindu to deliver your ad in person and beg them,
Right.
please, it's past 6 o'clock. So I think that was like a fantastic way to
Or you
learn
have,
lots.
or you have one unfortunate spelling error or something, then
Correct.
you forgot to go
Yeah,
live.
so they gave the wrong number and I had to go sit in one lady's house all day to answer the phone.
Shucks.
Um, so those kind of experiences are hard to replicate, and I'm not even sure if today's agencies are like that.
Right.
So when I joined Infosys, it was actually like an awesome interview because the question was, can I manage one brochure a year? And I was like, one brochure a year? That sounds like heaven. Totally cool. I can do this. So I joined Infosys to do one brochure a year. And I think 3 months down the line, I really didn't know what else to do with myself because that one brochure was done. And I remember that I was teaching myself HTML, and Nandan Nilakani was like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Learning HTML because you have free courses." And then I have French. There's another free course. He's like, "Do you not have any work?" I'm like, "Actually, I don't. I've done with my work for the year." So, from there, that's how I got access to the website. So I said, I can actually build you a website if you want. So from there, I expanded to PR and then Corpcom. And so it was a little bit of empire building actually. And that was great fun because it was a startup. We were below 100 million at the time. And, if there are any young marketers listening into this, my advice would also be that you have to see what's not being done and just pick up that piece instead of seeking permission. That's
Yeah.
the only way, you can actually grow and expand your portfolio. And from there, the challenge really was that I wanted to be a head of marketing, and Infosys was a little too big, and they did have a procedure and a process, and I wasn't going to be head of marketing. And in 1 year, I had three bosses, and that was kind of a bit of a trigger saying that, look, I can't
Right.
take this anymore. So I had the opportunity to head marketing for a little startup called Quintent. And I took it because I knew the founding team, and I would be head of marketing, which was very important to me. And then they got bought by iGate, so that's how I went into iGate, which is now owned by Capgemini. But that was again great because you could design your own logo and basically create a brand identity from scratch. And but 2 years there, and then you realize that you need a bigger canvas. You're used to a certain budget and how things work. And that's Wipro was looking for someone at the time, and therefore that's how the change to Wipro happened. And that was kind of like a dream come true because I was 35 and I was heading marketing for a Fortune 500 company. And $1 billion company in India in those days was a big deal.
Yeah.
So but it was very different because unlike say Infosys or iGate, where I could do my own thing, chart my own processes and so on, Wipro was an established brand, so they were a $1 billion firm. So your levers of change weren't as much as like a startup. So you had to kind of, uh, get people to go with you for the change. So that was kind of a very different experience. And 5 years down the line, I really wanted to be a CEO, and that's how Paul Reiter happened. So Paul Rider, again, you could chart your own path, and that's been a lot of fun. And I've done different things over the last decade of Paul Rider. But broadly speaking, I would say that, it's consolidated my learnings as a marketer, and things which earlier I would have had to think about or research. Now it's like, yeah, I know what you should do, because you've had this broad experience and seen the same problems in multiple
Right.
companies. Now it's like, just look at a website and you can just say, okay, I can see three things that you could easily improve. And I think that confidence is the evolution, and hopefully will reflect in my upcoming book, which is also No Money Marketing, but a much updated version.
Right, right. More than a few things that I'd like to pick up on, but before we go ahead, are you sort of? I would love to get your reaction on the world of advertising and PR. Right. I mean, traditionally, that's where all of the great marketers came from. Are you sort of sad that they've kind of missed the whole digital bus? I mean, they had such an opportunity to kind of capture that, right? I mean, 10, 15 years back, maybe.
So that era, look, you can't ever go back to the past, right?
Right.
And they lost the plot when they changed their, or when they did not adapt their payment model fast enough.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just digital, it was a whole fragmentation and driven by WPP, where PR was separate, digital was separate, everything became separate pieces. Whereas increasingly what the client wanted was an integrated approach.
Yeah.
And as soon as the commission based model went away, they really weren't able to adapt to a fee based model, which is what most of digital has become. So, and it's very hard. And if you look at tech, it's the same problem. Do I want to give up my existing licensing model to go on a SaaS model? I would rather not. If I can help it, I would like to hang on to my annual fees. And those who could not make the transition died there as well. So I think the decline started with not being able to change to a consulting model and staying
Hmm.
with the old commission model. And as far as the digital and the creative goes, it's also a financial thing. I mean, even when I joined advertising, they couldn't really pay salaries which matched what other marketing teams were able to pay. So over time, you cannot rely just on an exciting atmosphere to
Yeah.
attract the best, right? So the
Yeah.
more competition came along for this kind of talent, and India has become a creative hub for the BPO kind of creative agencies, it's really hard to compete with them saying, I'll pay you one-fourth of what they're going to pay you. So I
Yeah.
actually think the problem is not so much a creative or a strategic issue as a whole financial issue of
Yeah.
you're not able to command the premium that you need to attract the right people. It is a very fragmented space where a boutique shop can do really well for a while, and that boutique shop will undercut you to get the business. um, so that way is why. And also the skill sets that made you so awesome in advertising are not the skill sets that are going to work today.
Hmm.
It's a small fragment of it. So today, if you can't do tech, you can't do analytics, if you're not able to do the big picture, it's really hard to be a good marketer, right? So, I mean, I always say that today you actually need a Da Vinci kind of people. A pure Picasso, pure Einstein, neither really works anymore. You really need a guy who is a thinker as well as a creator, and that's a different
Yeah.
skill set. And also, frankly, what happened with that whole fragmentation model was that you now have, and it's true in companies as well, that you have people who specialized in, let's say, SEO.
Hmm.
There's no path for them to even head marketing or digital marketing, even. So I'm just going to spend 5 years as SEO expert. What's next for me is a little unclear.
Yeah.
So over time, I mean, that has hollowed out your marketing talent, where everybody's great at their tiny little specialization. but you're not getting a lot of people who've done PR and digital and creative and copy who used to actually come from the agencies.
Hmm.
Right. So I can still get down and write a press release. I can still write a white paper. I can still write a speech. I can design my own website if I have to. I can still do Canva, design the brochures. But that's to do with the fact that historically I've done all these things. Whereas today, a lot of people are, like 20 years experience with maybe 10 years in only one space.
Yeah.
And they feel a little diffident about actually getting their hands down and doing it. And that is actually what is going to hurt marketing more, as to where are all these renaissance people coming from.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more actually, because I mean, the more I see these profiles that are increasingly like siloed, right? Like, let's say field marketing folks, for example. Now, if you are stuck in the unfortunate year that we've had so far, where we haven't had any physical events as such, how do you stay relevant, right? And some of these things like SEO, for example, I don't know if someone should spend 5 or 10 years, in that particular silo as such, right? Uh, so the other thing I wanted to talk to you was about the whole 0 to 1 journey. When a marketer joins a team, I mean, he or she is really excited to do all of those fancy things. But then at the end of the day, I mean, you really have to move the needle for the founder or even the startup itself to prioritize marketing as a function within the organization, right? So how is that 0 to 1 journey like, and what can marketers do to sort of get marketing front and center in the organization?
So I would actually say that if a founder or a CEO does not believe in marketing, you cannot get them to believe in marketing.
Hmm.
It's hard for you to change their mind because that is a very sales orientation. So I would actually say that there are two classes: those who are into sales and those who are into marketing. If you are a marketer in a sales driven organization, then the only bits of your talent that they're interested in are those that deliver leads and conversions. Now, of course, you can deliver leads and conversions, and that is certainly part of marketing's task, but you won't have anything for a rainy day if you do not invest overall in areas like trust or storytelling or brand building and those things. And they don't necessarily give you immediate traction.
Right.
I'll give you the example, and I've just interviewed him also for my book, which is PC Mustafa of ID
ID
Foods.
Foods.
Now, his whole campaign right now is about trust stories. And like as an example, he runs what we used to call honesty shops in school, where you leave the product in an apartment building and people just have a little box, to put the money in, and you trust them for it. And now they're doing it in multiple communities and schools they want to start and so on. And it's one of his recurring things that trust is a very important aspect. So they want to record the whole manufacturing process, put it out there, live stream it, so to build trust. Now, does any of this immediately deliver you sales? It does not. And it is a lot of
Right.
effort for a company to put its money in this thing, because everybody will be, oh my God, you will lose 10% of the people who will not pay you. It's a lot of pressure on you. But you have
Right.
to believe in the concept and you're putting money where it is. Now, if you have that mindset as your boss, then I can do a lot of stuff around it, right? I can build the story. And of course, there is lead gen, all that is fine, but this is bigger than that. I
Hmm.
look at a Zomato again, forget the business angle of it, but their storytelling is on point. They always have a contrarian point of view, and that translates into their marketing voice and their social media voice, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, they did advertising on porn sites, right? Which worked really well for them.
Yeah.
They eventually pulled it out supposedly because of public backlash, but I think it was a stunt and it worked and they took it off. But now they've come up with period leaves, right? Now you could have called it wellness leave and nobody would have bothered, but you call it period leave and immediately everybody talks about it. And that
Right.
actually shows you that you are in it for the story, not so much the actual benefit
Hmm.
or whatever. So from a 0 to 1 perspective, I think first is that if you are a very enthusiastic marketing person, pick a company that is interested in marketing and you can easily tell. So I look
Hmm.
at a Freshworks, I can see that they're excited about marketing, right? I look at some other players in the same space and you know that it's a bit grudging the way they come to it. So step one is to find a company that cares about marketing and the CEO talks about the brand. I mean, just do a word count and see how many times man or woman mentions brand, and you know that this company cares about it. So that's one.
Hmm.
And I'll give you another example. Like recently, I had an invitation to join a company board, and I had asked one of my friends for advice, and he just said, look for the word brand and marketing in their annual report and see how many times it comes up. He said that'll give you an idea of how
Right.
interested they are in that, right?
Right.
So you could do simple things like that to gauge whether this is a possibility. The second
Right.
is that once you do join the company, always try to find a pet project, a passion project for the CEO that you can contribute to.
Hmm.
So, if something is important to the CEO and marketing plays a role, then people notice you, and the more you get noticed and trusted, the more likely you will be given other campaigns to run. So try to find stuff that is not peripheral to the CEO but is a central campaign, right? Third is that if you are in a sales focused organization, don't keep banging your head against the wall of saying brand, brand, brand. It's not going to work for you. Try to
Hmm.
find ways to sneak in what you believe is most important, but which always connects to a sales deliverable. And if you're not able to do that, at least get the sales head to buy in and say, yeah, we've got to do this because it is going to help me.
Hmm.
And therefore, at least you can go to the CEO and make the case that there is a business objective to it. And you will see returns in 6 months or 9 months or whatever it is. And lastly, in today's hard times, nobody really wants to spend money on something where you won't see results immediately. So this is certainly not the time to pitch, long, big brand projects. But my advice to people has been that break it up into a monthly spend, so you can show them that in 1 month you will get these results. And if you trust me on this, give me the next month's budget. So look at
Right.
slicing up your projects into 1 month kind of outcomes so that people also have faith that they can give you this marketing spend. So that would be my advice for anyone currently in marketing.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, branding has a bit of a stepmotherly treatment, especially in startups, right? I mean, because they would much rather prefer leads, opportunities, and demand gen as such. So it's a very important point that you bring up. But then, I mean, if you look at some of the startups that have really done well, like the unicorns, like, whether it's Gainsight or Drift or, those kind of guys, they've really owned a category with their storytelling. So, how do you make brand front and center for a startup? So if you were to talk to a founder, how would you convince him or her to sort of start investing in the brand?
That's what I'm saying. I've rarely found that you can convince someone to do
Okay.
this.
So
So
you're saying it's a natural inclination,
if you look at the successful companies, they are very into marketing,
right?
right? So if you look at White Hat, which is a current talk of the town, it is an entirely marketing driven startup. So is Byju's hardcorely into marketing. You look at ID Foods, hardcorely into marketing.
Right.
So, I would say that if you want to grow fast, you have to, and that is, I mean, see, let's put it this way. You don't have to go and do TV advertising. I'm not saying that. But look, there
Hmm.
is a progression of awareness, interest, then desire, then actual acquisition.
Right.
Now, if your target audience doesn't know you exist, they can't buy you.
Hmm.
So you can do really targeted work. So Drift was never a mass brand. Drift was
Yeah.
always about the people who could potentially buy. But those people thought that this was an awesome, sexy product and whatever they did was there. But it was
Yeah.
never like a big, flashy marketing campaign. It was always a great performance marketing campaign. Right. So once you got in, I mean, yeah, they kept sending you stuff and it was very exciting and they had offers and so on. So I would say that, if you look at startups that fail, it is because they do not want to invest in branding and marketing. They think that product is awesome, it will sell. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, sure. If people come to your shop, they will buy it, but they have to first come to your shop.
Yeah.
And even after they have come to your shop, I would say that, look, you still need some basic things such as so there are what I call the six principles, but out of them two would be that you still need the social proof. So you need to show that hundreds of people are using your stuff. You still need to show some influencers or endorsements saying this product is awesome to get people to jump. And then I
Mhm.
still need the communication which moves you from phase 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And if I don't want to invest in a good marketing team, you'll find that lots of leads are coming but they're not converting because you are relying entirely on a sales force to do all of that for you. And in
Mm.
today's world, no one has time for so much of time with sales. And if you're a SaaS
Right.
product, I'm expecting a drip marketing campaign. I'm not expecting that you're going to call me every minute and say, oh, it is not on the website, but sir, we have this extra feature. That's a very old
Right.
fashioned model, right? I want everything to come tuck tuck tuck, which means
Right.
also that your marketing is not just a standard brochure type guy, but he's also looking at the customer journey and mapping all the key points, and he has content for each of those trigger points. So
Yeah.
I would say it's a mismatch of two things. One is the CEO hasn't understood that a good product by itself does not sell. But I also
Mhm.
think marketers tend to jump up and down too much on, I need video, I need brochure, and so on. Whereas let's talk customer journey, let's talk user experience. I think you get a better hearing from the CEO in that case.
Right. Yeah. And particularly given how fast products get commoditized these days, I think it's imperative to invest in a brand story as such, right? Uh, okay, really sorry for the interruption. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about something amazing. Clogo helps your remote teams be more productive by helping them close decisions more faster. I've worked remotely for the last 4 months, and it's just a lot of going back and forth on Slack, on email, on Zoom, etc., but never really getting to a point of execution, right? Well, Clogo makes things a lot more simpler. You can have communication contextually around decisions that you want to make. All you have to do is open a thread on Slack like this and continue to talk about what you want to do. With a set agenda. It could be your product roadmap, it could be a marketing campaign, it could be a support ticket, etc. And once you're done, it all syncs with your Slack, and you have all of these decisions accessible when you need it, where you need it, right? Guys, I've tried this out and it makes you super productive. If you're even remotely interested, I suggest you go to clergo.com, that's CLERGO.com, and check it out for yourself. Cheers. Uh, Now, you've spent about 2 decades in technology marketing as such, right? And you've seen the whole journey from services to SaaS. What are some things that have changed, and what are some things that have remained constant in that journey?
See, one is that with a SaaS model, there are certain aspects of marketing that are way more important than when you do services sale. So in services sale, I am a very custom. I don't need to know product marketing. I just, I look at what the customer wants, and that's all I have to do for them. The joke, I don't know if you heard this one, that there's an interview, and they have the Russians come in, the Americans come in, the Chinese come in, and the Indians come in. And the interview panel asks the question of what is 2 plus 2. So the Americans are like, look, we invented Excel, dude. We are not going to answer this stupid question. And they walk away. And the Russians are like, oh, hang on a second, my supercomputer will give you the answer in a second. And they say 4, and they walk away. And the Chinese are like, yeah, okay, hang on a second, we will just check with our bosses and we will let you know. But the Indian, walks across and sits at the desk with the interview panel and says, what would you like it to be? And we'll build it. So that is actually a good description of the services industry and how the Indian IT industry has flourished. We will do
Right.
what you say. In SaaS, unfortunately, I don't get that opportunity. I have to know what you want and build a gold standard process. So the skill set required is different. Once I've got this product, I need to do far more targeting because the temptation is that this fellow wants us. So the temptation is to broadcast widely and then to customize. And a lot of Indian startups fail because they say SaaS, but they get bogged down in customization for the first 10 clients.
Hmm.
Whereas you're better off saying, okay, my product will satisfy out of 100 people, maybe 20, but I have to find those 20 people and get them on board. So, and then I have to keep making products to sell to that audience instead of keeping on looking for new people. So the way you do marketing is a very different rhythm. Then I also need to build far more trust, because in a services thing, my trust is that you will change things if things go wrong. Whereas here, my fear is, oh my God, what if you go bust tomorrow? What if you don't give me the features that you promised? What if you don't adapt to the latest Google update or whatever? So you have to build a trust that I will take care of you. And that requires branding and storytelling, that you should be confident in what I can do. And that, like I said,
Right.
is testimonial, social proof, all of that much more important than standard B2B IT services. And lastly, the whole community picture comes in for SaaS much more than services, where, like an SAP has always had this fantastic user group. So
Hmm.
ASUG in the US is like huge community, runs its own conferences and everything. Very few IT firms have built a group of that caliber and strength. But in a SaaS model, you must have a user community, and so managing and creating that user community is a big part of marketing, which, like copycat stuff and trying to save money in content, all that will not work, because if the user group doesn't see value in you, they are not going to be
Yeah.
active members, right? So
Right.
we ran the user group for SAP for India for a while, for a couple of years, and the amount of two-way traffic and discussion is huge. And again,
Hmm.
if you're a master user, then you go to Germany, you meet the actual guys who design the product. So those are kind of skill sets that we need to incorporate once we're into the B2B SaaS model. IT services, yeah, user group, you have conferences, we do that. But
Hmm.
here, because it's product design and once it's set, you can't change it for a couple of years, it's really important. So I
Right.
would say the tools are different. So in services, things like community are optional, but here it's huge. The trust stories, testimonials in services, I can put under the radar, as in I can give it to you as a private information, but in SaaS I have to make it public domain. I have to do far better product management than I had to do in services. And I
Hmm.
also have to think through my user journey way more, because unlike in services where I can do human intervention whenever I want to, here, if I lose you on the website, I really don't have a means to catch you back.
Right. Right. So then, what are some of the metrics that become increasingly relevant in today's marketing? From the perspective that you're talking about.
The metrics vary for everybody. Finally, you do want growth in business, right? So it's
So
a
some
question
function
of
of
how
revenue,
long
basically.
you can wait. So the metrics are the same,
Right.
but how you're able to connect it back to your current business needs. So like I said, a user group has its own rhythm, like how many people have you got, how engaged are they, how much are they willing to pay to hang around your user group. So each of these elements has its own dynamics and own metrics set. um, you could do conversion rates from the website, so drop off versus conversion, but then you'll also say how much of it is repeat business, how many left after the first year. So there's a ton of metrics that vary for each one. So I would just say that, look, I mean, the structure is different whether you're doing services or SaaS. The metrics will vary accordingly. So in services, your big job as marketing is to deliver the person to sales, and then
Right.
you have nurture, and that's it. Whereas in your B2B SaaS model, I have a far greater role in product management, customer journey mapping, and the community management thereafter. And then renewals becomes one of my biggest metrics.
Right. Right. So you wrote No Money Marketing in 2010, and it was about marketing. Well, it was about innovating while also being frugal, right? Somehow there's this misnomer, or I don't this impression that marketing is expensive. You need to spend a lot of dollars to really get anything out of it. Uh, so what would you say to that? So if you could maybe summarize the book for whoever is listening to the podcast.
Sure. So, I think some of the things that have changed actually over the last 10 years is that, so in the case of, say, an Infosys or an iGate, PR was a fantastic low cost lever. But today, the way media has changed, I mean, the structure has changed. PR cannot be your lowest cost model anymore. You cannot rely on PR to build your brand, because the financial models of publications have changed. So it is very unlikely that you are going to get the kind of reach and frequency you need by just relying on our organic media. So you are going to have to set aside a budget for that. Whereas today, what would get you in relatively low cost awareness would actually be in the spaces of content and storytelling. So today, if you have viral content, certainly you can get a lot of mileage at low cost. And therefore, the cost for you is to create the story that people like to share. So more than organic media, today we are counting on, I mean, organic media relies on the storytelling power. So you would have to invest a lot more in that. The second low cost tool that has become more important is your own database and community building. So today, I mean, even a LinkedIn doesn't give you email IDs of your contacts. So you have to build your own organic database. Otherwise, forever you're going to have to pay for every connection. So to manage your database and get more and more of prospects into it, and then keep them engaged with again content and thought leadership is a huge cost saver for you. And thirdly, community is something that will keep people engaged, happy, and with you at a very low cost. And these are all owned media, is what I would say that you can manage with. I would say earned media has become way tougher than it was 10 years ago because media is fragmented. Media is not really making a ton of money. COVID has only made the situation worse. So it's hard to expect them to give you free coverage for nothing anymore, right? Unless you're truly exciting and relevant to the users. But even then, their models
Yeah.
have changed, so you can't count on that. So I would say today you have to give them content that is truly awesome. So you have to invest in research, you have to invest in actual POV content, like a McKinsey quarterly kind of content is what really flies today. And it is still relatively low cost to, let's say, putting your money in advertising or buying yourself endless Facebook ads. So it's a little harder today to build a brand just on organic. So again, clever marketing is required where you're able to track who's interested, target audience management, and again, once you've got them, to hang on to them and keep selling more stuff to them.
Right. So I want to talk about something that you just mentioned, which is building a community as such, right? Now we're seeing a whole shift in that where, people are building an audience first and then building a product for that audience, right? Any lessons that you can share in terms of how to go about building this community?
So there are, I mean, so community management is a big field, but finally people come because there is something in it for them.
Right.
So when you want to build an audience today, people won't come unless every week there is of something of immediate value to them. So that is one. And so anyone who's planning a strategy of community building, figure out what you're going to offer in it. Now, the easy and the cheap way out to get traffic is to say, I will do interviews, because people like to see themselves there, which is fantastic. But then, you know, interviews aren't the most exciting pieces of content. So you have to balance that out with other pieces like research. So first is, figure out that, but they also want to have a chance to network, another key human driver. So how will you facilitate that? And that's really more important today because, you don't have physical events. So how am I going to facilitate networking with not just my organization, but amongst the community members? I need to have those features in place. Thirdly, how do they shape your agenda? So if I have no voice in your product, then why am I a part of your community? So like
Interesting.
classic, like me, I mean, Xiaomi has got a fantastic community, which has stood by them even with all the anti-China rhetoric and
Yeah.
everything. They have still, they have spoken up for their brand. And me sales have not been as impacted because they have invested in this community for years, right? So that's another case study which I actually have in my book, which is that you have to invest in your community before your times of trouble, not try to set up a community now that, okay, physical events are dead.
Right.
So you have to find what is in it for them. So they want to shape your strategy. They want to get preferential access to your updates. They want preferential customer care. So there's a bunch of preferential treatment that your community is expecting. which if you don't deliver, again, it's like, why am I wasting my time on this community? So you have to look at networking, you have to look at content benefit, and you have to look at like the fan experience. How is it different from that of anybody else?
Right.
And so, for example, I've been running a newsletter now for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I also didn't really view it as a community, right? As a newsletter community is, you look at it as newsletter subscribers. But today I did something very different. I sent my core readers, so the ones who most frequently open your newsletter, I sent them a question saying, what do you want me to write about? Here are three topics, pick one. And it's like, I'm really feeling stupid for not having thought of it earlier, that why don't you ask your readers what you should write about, right? Because otherwise you can see in the open rates that some topics are more interesting than others, but rarely does a publication say, look, I have 5 topics, pick one here. So
Hmm.
I'm actually getting fantastic responses, and they're actually suggesting other topics for me to write about.
Nice.
And it's great for me because I'm also getting energy from them saying, hey, I like this topic, or I love all these pieces. So I'm also getting feedback, but this is how I'm on the journey to convert someone from being a reader to an actual contributor, right? So someone actually gave me 3 topics, and I said, boss, this is way beyond my pay scale, I can't do it. But if
Right.
you would like to write, happy to host your article. And he's actually come back saying, okay, I can do this piece. So now it's like a two-way conversation, and so much more fun for everybody involved. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what a community should be, where it's a two-way conversation between the brand and the people who have a stake in it.
Yeah, I mean, I could not recommend your emails and the community more to the people,
Thank
because I
you.
mean, I've really found it really interesting and useful and relevant all the time. I don't know how you manage to do it so
I'm
consistently
coming back to you for a
over.
testimonial. I finally decided to market myself.
I don't know how you've been able to do it for years and years now. So it's amazing, right? So something that you mentioned is the two-way communication, and one of the things that social did was bring about this whole two-way communication, right? Where people could talk back to brands and so on. And you were one of the earliest advocates of digital and social media as such. Um, uh, so earlier, when people kind of viewed it as another channel, today it's become default, in fact, right? It's a cohesive, comprehensive strategy in itself for every brand as such, irrespective of B2B, B2C, or whatever else space they're in. How do you think digital itself has changed over the years, and how do you see it going forward?
So when I started out with digital, it genuinely was a two-way conversation.
Hmm.
But today it's a very noisy place, and I don't think brands have been able, for the most part, to handle this two-way conversation, right? So when they entered this, maybe say this whatever conversation forum, they did not realize the number of complaints that they were going to get. So if you look at Twitter, it has become a customer communication channel for, let's say, telecom and so on. But if you see the answers, they are by and large, hey, we will make a note of it and come back to you. It's a stock answer.
Right.
Right? So if you're a consumer care brand, or if you are a financial brand, or if you're a telecom brand, by and large, what you're getting is individual complaints, and you are not equipped to handle those complaints like this. I mean, you've got tools at the back end and everything, but
Hmm.
it is not a very personal conversation that most people have been able to put in. So, an exception would be an Anand Mahindra who lends his personal credibility to
Yeah.
the conversation, and that makes a difference, right? So, at least escalations are going to go to Anand Mahindra personally, and you
Hmm.
feel that someone in senior management is looking at it. But if I look at most brands, I don't get that assurance. And while briefly there was a period when you felt that, oh, if I go on Twitter, my problems will be resolved, today it has become, if you are a very important person on Twitter, or you're an important person on Facebook, your problems may be resolved through social media. But otherwise, you are back to square one of trying to call customer care, and you've gone back into that model.
Hmm.
So I think the social hasn't lived up to the promise for the consumer, and brands have to think through how they're going to handle this, because everybody had a voice was in theory, till everybody had a voice, you know. So while the first 1% had a voice, it was true. So they like, oh, all customers, but truly it was only the 1% early adopters who had a voice. We could handle them. But now it's all automated and it feels that way. So now it doesn't feel very special when you go on social media and complain. It doesn't
Hmm.
seem to work. And I'm also not sure that they're able to address the most common problems through an FAQ, or they don't want to solve the problem. I don't know which one it is, but the noise levels have gone up, not as much as the resolution levels have gone up. There are exceptions, but by and large, so like I said, you know, so the exceptions would be, say, a Potia. So if
Hmm.
you tag a Meena Ganesh, she will reply in person and say, okay, I'm very sorry. And there is some two-way happening over there. But
Yeah.
the larger players, like a telecom player and all, they're not doing that kind of pull out anymore. Indigo, I've always had a good experience. They do try to keep it personal, but vast majority, again, the volumes are so much that they cannot handle it. And I
Yeah.
know that with Indigo or with these guys, I'm getting probably better treatment because of the number of followers I have. So my
Right.
advice is actually the other way around, saying if you as a customer want better customer experience, please invest in your social media presence and build up your credibility.
Right. Right. So on that note, what are some of the brands and people that you really admire, and why?
So I think Anand Mahindra has done a great job. He has kept it personal. He has kept it very nice, and there is a certain amount of trust that he has been able to build in the brand and in himself. So I would definitely say Mahindra is going about building themselves up as a respected brand in the right way. um, I like what, say, an ID is doing with the trust stories, right? And again, it is a very person-driven approach. He uses his first-person voice in
Yeah.
public, so I think that is pretty cool. What he's trying to do. Um, I actually like two very different brands. So from Teamlease, I like Manisha Sabharwal for the honesty with
Yeah.
which he's
He's
presenting the
fantastic.
current
Yeah.
scenario. Yeah, but I also like Paul Dupuy of Randstad, because he also has a very personal voice, which is based on his experiences and so on. And he has decided that it's a very optimistic, or, you know, how can I help you approach, rather than, oh my God, you know, the world's gone to hell and how am I going to ever find anything for you? So I
Right.
like, so basically, I like CEOs that are, um, you know, personal and authentic. I mean, you can see that they put effort into the communication, and where they reply to someone else's communication as well. So I think that's super awesome. As a brand, I think, you know, Mahindra, like I said, is on the right track. I like what obviously Tata Group has done tremendous amount to build trust in their brand. I mean, you just have to tell. I mean, I just put out their mission statement, which said this brand, you know, puts leadership and trust as its first principle, and everybody just gets the answer. It's Tata Group, right? So I think
Right.
to build that kind of a, you know, brand is awesome. I like Freshworks. I like what they've done with marketing. It's a brash brand, but it's always on point on marketing. So I think I admire them for, you know, sticking to their principles and doing that. Um, yeah, I think that's about it.
So, on Freshworks itself, I mean, they had this whole Salesforce thing where they, the Florida balloon during Dreamforce and took on the big, high and mighty, right? I mean, uh, a lot of brands are starting to do that, wherein they're taking a position, they're taking an actual perspective about the market. Do you kind of advise that? And if someone's going to do that, what are some pointers to beware of?
So my only thing is, look, if you, you know, what they always tell you is that if dog bites man, it's a very boring story. You have to have the
Right.
man bites dog story. So
Right.
if I tell you that, oh, I am superior to X, no one cares. So you have to find a controversial position to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a position which anyone who's a challenger brand will take. So if you're the market leader, you will not want to take this position because you have too much to lose.
You have more to
So
lose.
yeah, so as a market leader, you cannot take the stance, you would not. But as a challenger, it's completely in your interest to beat up the market leader.
Right.
So I would say that, this position is best for a challenger. You can take on anybody. And challenger doesn't mean you're a small brand. It just means that your competitor is bigger than you for any reason, or you're newer than that entrant and he's an incumbent. So as long as you see someone as an incumbent, you can feel free to do this. Um, the only downside to this is that, the incumbent can always come after you with more resources and more whatever that they have. So you have a short window of opportunity on a particular platform. So if
Right.
you say they are more expensive, then hey, I mean, they can always change that around. They can bleed you dry if they choose to.
Right.
So it's a question of how important it is for them to capture the segment. But if you play it right, you would look at a segment that is not that important to them, and that's how you grow. And therefore, you can take any old position you like. The only advice which I would give people, and some brands have not done that, is to be honest in your communication. So people are kind of like faking it, saying that, oh, Bill Gates, recommends me because they just put a quote in his picture. That's not ethical. And sooner or later, it will catch up with you.
Hmm.
But, or, making claims like, oh, we work better than XYZ. And then in small print, it is like, we think so. Um, so eventually that catches up with you.
Right.
So as long as your POV can be backed up by data, I think it's a fantastic thing. And one of the things I mentioned in no money marketing is that you need to own a superlative. So you have
Hmm.
to be the best, the biggest, the brightest, something. So you find yourself that position in something that matters to your client. So, people say I'm the cheapest, but then you need to have research which shows that,
You are the
cost is the
cheapest.
biggest driver for them. Whereas, for example, for phones, you'll find that camera is the biggest driver, decision maker for people. Like for this
Right.
price, can I get an 8 megapixel or 256 megapixel or whatever it is that I'm getting? Maybe that matters more. Whereas for others, maybe it is storage space that matters more. Like how many contacts can I save, or how much can I save? Can I add a SD card? So you have to find that thing that matters. For example, for hotels, there was research which says that you can do whatever you like, but people judge you. Like the business traveler cares only about two things: the bed and the shower. And so
Hmm.
you can do everything else with your lobby. You can do branding, all that is fine. But if your shower doesn't come on hot the moment he tries, he does not like your hotel. And if the bed isn't nice, that's the only thing, right?
Right.
So we have to find out that heuristic for whichever brand we're in, and you have to find a messaging which is differentiated around that.
Right. Okay, I want to move on to some questions around careers in marketing. I mean, there are going to be people listening to this who are going to be wondering, how do you graduate from a manager to a director to a VP to a CMO, right? And each of these specific roles will have certain expectations and responsibilities attached to them. What would you suggest would be the swiftest path upwards?
So for me, the easiest run which I did was that I would pick somebody whose job I wanted, and I would go to them and say, look, how'd you get here? What did you have to do? What were the skill sets required? And then I would try to, work backwards from there and say, how do I acquire it as soon as possible? So I
Hmm.
looked for someone who was, 5 years ahead of me, and then, say in 3 years, can I acquire all of this? Now, once I had that required competence, HR hates it when I say this. If you do not get that role, it is time to move to a different organization where that role is available,
Hmm.
right? So you cannot expect that the same organization will deliver on this whatever you want, because the fact is, the higher you go, the pyramid is smaller. So there are only three jobs of that nature in that company, and you want one of the three. You can weep and wail about it and wait years, or you can say, look, there's a smaller company which has this position open, so why don't I go get it, right? And that
Hmm.
actually is something I did. So I did quit Infi because I didn't get the job I wanted, and I went to a much smaller little startup called Quintent. And because of that, I became head of marketing, which is what I wanted. And if I hadn't done that, I doubt if Wipro would have taken me as CMO. So, if I had stayed with Infosys, my chances are I'd have spent another 10 years waiting for the role.
Hmm.
Um, right. So, you have to also say, okay, this is my cutoff. These are the skill sets, and I'm done. I'm going to move on. Second is that you cannot pursue money. So I always have walked away from money. I mean, so my first job in after my MBA was my job offer was actually Reliance, and I did not take that, and I went door to door hunting for an ad agency job, which paid a pittance. It actually paid me less than what my previous engineering job was paying me. But I said,
Right.
look, I have to be in advertising, and this is the best they can do. So Ogilvy was not like the cheapest of the firms. If this is the best they can do, this is what I do. So I did not, but because of that, I was able to get into Infosys, and Infosys was fantastic for me. So not only did I get double the salary that I had in Ogilvy, so even with that, I was the lowest paid in the marketing team, and they were like, "We can't do more than double. What can we say?" You went to Ogilvy.
Right.
But I also got ESOPs, so it all worked out. But then I
Right.
also left half my ESOPs on the table when I quit and went to iGate. So, or Quinton rather. But that was because I felt this opportunity was at this time and you have to do it. So, walk away from money would be principle two. The third one is that try to look for roles where you control your destiny. So
Hmm.
people often get suckered into title changes and bigger sounding jobs, or more money. But look for roles where you control more of what you can do. So where you have a smaller budget, but which is in your control. Like you don't have to go to CFO and get it approved every day.
Hmm.
So as you rise, that should be one of the criteria that you have more control over your own destiny. You don't have to check, can I spend this money? Can I get so and so as a speaker? The more control you have. Otherwise, you will find that you've got the title, but when you go for that ultimate job, they're like, oh, but you don't seem to have any authority. You don't seem to have decision making powers and so on. So
Right.
only three things. One is map out your route and stick to your timelines. Quit if you have to meet your timelines. Second is walk away from money towards whatever role it is that you wanted. And the third is, look for roles where you control your own destiny.
Right. So it's also been a pretty tough year for marketers, what with COVID and everything. Uh, any advice on executing during this, tumultuous time?
So it's been a tough year for everyone, not just marketers.
To say the least.
Yeah, unless you happen to be in like, a Zoom site or something, it's tough for everybody. Um, so the one advice I've given people is that this is not the year to defend your crown jewels and say, I have to do brand building and logo changes and all of that. This is a year where you do have to, if you have built your brand, this is the time to monetize it. And if you had saved up for a rainy day, this is the time to cash in. So um it is, I mean, you can argue that you should invest all of that, but it's not going to happen. Nobody has the money for it. You have to look at survival and say, what can I do to help my company survive? So um if you're in a company which has done well because of COVID, and there are a few, then you should look at expansion as fast as possible at the lowest cost. So that is a category of maybe 20% of marketers, good for you. But if you're the balance 80%, how can you help your CEO to survive? How can you hang on to existing customers? And how can you build customers? So I'm talking proper performance marketing and lead gen. Rest of the stuff that you had will have to take a cut at this point. And
Right.
foolishly trying to say, I want to hang on to my budget when everybody wants you to cut it, it is not going to make you friends. They're just going to get fed up and cut your budget anyway, and probably say, this fellow doesn't, keeps yapping about this and that. Let's, make him part time or something. So, right now is the time to also look for your own security. It is not the time to stand out on a limb and say,
Hmm.
oh, they don't understand branding. This is not the time for that. This is the time to say, okay, fine, sales is down. Let me see what I can do for you. So
Right.
my advice to everyone is right now is the time to be CFO's best buddy.
Right. Uh, that's a difficult job, but uh,
It is a difficult job, but see, finally, marketing often has the largest discretionary budget, and that looks very appealing to people.
yeah, yeah.
And I mean, yeah, there is a joke that okay, I mean, one guy, I mean, there's a Glassberg, not Glassberg, marketoonist cartoon about how guy becomes CEO and is told, you're now in charge of your P&L and here's a lever. Whenever you need to save money, pull it and marketing costs get slashed by 20%.
Yeah,
So
it's all too real
that is,
actually.
it is, but
Yeah,
depending on the situation of your company, it is going to
yeah,
be really hard to convince someone to do long-term activities.
yeah,
My other advice to people is give a 1 month marketing plan. Don't rely on a 3 month or anything.
yeah,
Give a 1 month that is broken up week by week where they can see that things are moving in the right
yeah.
direction. That will build faith for them to give you money for the next month. They're
Yeah, I
also
mean,
living month to month.
yeah, somewhere I think marketers also have to get a little more real, and maybe, I mean, this will help them be that. Do you want to talk about the upcoming book that you have? I mean, are we going to see a
Yeah, so it's
follow-up?
the same principles of no money marketing except updated for the realities of 2020. And it's been
Yeah,
updated again because COVID hit.
right.
So when I started writing, I was actually like, if there's no recession, what's going to happen? Will people be interested in no money marketing? But now I think everybody's into no money marketing.
Yeah,
But it's always about low cost, and it's not about saving money, but about how to make the best use of whatever limited funds we have, and as what type of company benefits from which type of marketing. So that's always been there. So I talk about the 6 principles of persuasive communication and how can you build on that for marketing, how to identify your position. So if anybody wants an overview of how to build a brand without too much of money, then I think it's a great book.
right. For me, I think it's come full circle because I read your book in 2010, right after the 2008, 2009, the whole crisis and everything. And now I'm going to be reading this in 2020, right? So,
Thank you.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So, before we leave you, I mean, any books or podcasts that you would kind of recommend to people who are listening?
So of late, I find so more than just marketing, I like to read about customer experience and the behavioral science. That's kind of more interesting because the principles of marketing remain the same. I mean, different. I mean, like if you look at a Seth Godin, he has so many books, but essentially, they just he just rewrites the principles in a more readable, nicer way for every book.
Right.
So that doesn't change much, but it's like every time I read a Dan Ariely kind of a book, then I learn more about how do consumers or how do human beings react, and I find that more useful. So newsletter wise, I like Near Eyal,
Yeah.
Nireyal. I find that really interesting. I like Morning Brew, which is an American version of a newsletter because of the style of writing. I do read Morning Context from the Indian stable. That's also really cool. What else do I like? I read Content Marketing Institute newsletters occasionally, and there is a Ben Evans newsletter that's also really cool.
Right.
So I basically I like Avinash Kaushik's newsletter as well. So I do, but I should say that nowadays everybody wants to go paid, so it's getting harder to manage how many newsletters you read. So these are all free at the moment.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Jesse. Really, really appreciate your insights. I mean, this was a fascinating conversation, and hopefully, we'll do a follow up sometime as well. So, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.